Every nation on the planet owes money. The United States alone is buried under more than $38 trillion, the largest debt it has ever carried. The European Union sits on roughly $14 trillion, Japan is nearing $9 trillion, and even wealthy oil states like Saudi Arabia or industrial giants like Germany and China are deep in the red. But here's the strange part. If everyone owes money, then who is on the other side collecting it? Welcome to the Money Chronicles, where money, power, and the past collide, and where the simplest numbers often hide the most complicated truths. Debt isn't just a problem to be solved. It's the framework modern society is built on. Every war, every recession, every period of prosperity, every collapse, all of it stands on this invisible network of IOUs. And if you trace those IOUs long enough, you run into a disturbing realization. The world isn't indebted to one person or one country. In a way, it owes the money to itself. But that doesn't mean the benefits are shared evenly. To understand how we ended up with a planet suffocating under more than $315 trillion in total debt, nearly 3 times the size of the global economy, we need to rewind the story. Long before credit cards or online banking, the concept of national debt didn't emerge from Wall Street. It was born on the battlefield. Back in 1694, England found itself locked in a draining war with France and running dangerously low on gold. Desperate for money, the king turned not to nobles, but to merchants. In return for a steady stream of interest payments, guaranteed by future taxes, these merchants agreed to fund the crown. To organize this new financial arrangement, the Bank of England was created. And for its time, it was nothing short of revolutionary. For the first time, a government could spend money it didn't physically possess. And those who lent to the crown received something invaluable in return, a promise. A government-backed pledge that could be traded, sold, or passed on. This simple promise became the first government bond, the tiny seed from which the entire modern financial system would grow. France soon adopted the idea. The Dutch improved it. And after winning independence, the young United States embraced it to fund its revolution and fuel its push westward. Before long, national debt was no longer seen as a sign of weakness. It became a symbol of power, a measure of how trustworthy and capable a nation was. To borrow was to lead. Once upon a time, empires captured land to seize gold. Now they issued bonds to capture interest. The battlefield moved from the front lines to the balance sheet. Jump ahead 300 years, and debt has become the world's most influential export. The United States is $38 trillion deep. Japan sits beyond $9 trillion. And globally, humanity adds the equivalent of $1 trillion more every 100 days. Every nation borrows, every bank lends, and every citizen, through taxes, savings, pensions, and deposits, ends up playing both roles at once, debtor and creditor. But the real question is, who's actually on the receiving end of this global chain of IOUs? To understand that, we start with the United States, because its debt isn't just an American issue. It's a global one. Of the roughly $38 trillion the US owes, about half is held by the public, meaning investors, not government agencies. And around 2/3 of those investors are American themselves, banks, pension funds, mutual funds, insurance companies, and of course, the Federal Reserve. The remaining third, nearly $9 trillion, belongs to foreign holders. Japan leads the pack with about $1 trillion, followed by China with roughly $800 billion, then the UK, Luxembourg, Belgium, and others. So yes, America owes money to China, but it's only about 2% of the total. The truth is far less dramatic. Most of America's debt is owed to Americans. The Treasury issues bonds. Investors buy them. The Federal Reserve sometimes purchases those same bonds, creating new dollars in the process. Americans pay taxes that cover interest payments, and those payments end up in American retirement funds. It's a loop, a closed cycle. The debt is real, but the creditor is mostly the system itself looking in the mirror. And this circular pattern isn't unique to the US. It's the way the entire world operates. Japan buys US treasuries. The US lends to Europe through the IMF. Europe finances developing nations through the World Bank. And developing nations send their savings right back to wealthy countries by storing foreign reserves in Western bonds. It's a global game of hot potato, except the potato is made entirely of promises. Every nation is holding someone else's IOU. Every promise is backed by yet another promise. Think of it like a poker game where each player has borrowed chips from the next, and the only rule keeping the game going is that no one stands up. But there's a fourth, far more powerful layer, the markets themselves. Behind every government bond lies a complex web of institutions, hedge funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and central banks, managing tens of trillions in assets. They are the true gatekeepers of credit, deciding which countries can borrow cheaply and which must pay a steep price to survive. When confidence falters, the results are swift and brutal. Currencies crash, governments falter, entire economies can be reshaped almost overnight. In this system, democracy chooses leaders, but the markets ultimately decide who survives. And at the top of it all sits the central bank, the modern high priest of global finance. Central banks don't just oversee debt, they create it. Every time the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank buys government bonds, they inject new money into the system. One balance sheet's liability becomes another's asset. Every dollar in circulation represents a corresponding unit of debt somewhere. There is no such thing as money without an IOU. Every coin, bill, or digital dollar carries a hidden promise. For decades, this cycle has been sustained by one thing: trust. As long as investors believe governments will pay interest, even if the principal is never repaid, the system keeps turning. But what happens when that trust wavers? History has shown us. In Greece, 2010, government debt became unmanageable. Bondholders panicked. Yields spiked. The European Central Bank and the IMF stepped in to stabilize the situation, but their solution came at a cost: austerity, tax hikes, and deep spending cuts. Tax hikes, spending cuts, and waves of unemployment became the price of bailouts for an entire generation. In Argentina, repeated defaults turned debt into a lingering national curse. In Sri Lanka, shortages of fuel and political turmoil erupted when the government ran out of foreign currency to meet its obligations. When the system collapses, the real creditors suddenly appear: the IMF, rating agencies, and anonymous bondholders who, in effect, hold nations by the throat. Yet even after these crises, the same cycle resumes. Old loans are replaced by new ones. Debts are restructured. The financial machine resets, often under a different name, but the balance sheet remains fundamentally the same. In the modern world, debt is not meant to be fully repaid. It is meant to be rolled over. Governments today don't plan to eliminate their obligations. Not now, not ever. This isn't a conspiracy. It's policy. When you or I take a loan, we're expected to pay back the principal. Governments operate differently. They treat debt like a rolling subscription, issuing new bonds to cover old ones, a process economists call refinancing. In this system, interest is the real product. It's the rent paid for stability. The global economy now runs on that rent, like a shark that must keep moving to survive. Today, the entire financial system depends on confidence, not repayment. The United States will never pay off its $38 trillion debt. It will simply refinance it indefinitely. Japan has been rolling over its obligations for decades, with debt now exceeding 250% of GDP, yet its government bond yields remain near zero. Why? Because for investors, government debt isn't seen as a liability. It's the safest collateral in existence. A U.S. Treasury bond is treated not as a debt to be repaid, but as a cornerstone of the global financial system. Government debt isn't just a liability, it's an asset. It forms the backbone of global markets. Pension funds hold it. Banks use it as collateral. Central banks even treat it as money itself. The system relies on the fact that governments will never fully repay their debt. If they tried, the world would suddenly lose its most trusted financial instrument. Imagine if Washington decided to pay off every single dollar it owes. Banks and investment funds worldwide would instantly lose their most stable asset. The money supply would shrink drastically, sparking deflation and economic collapse. Paying off the debt outright would destroy the very engine that keeps the economy running. So governments do the opposite. They issue more debt, not recklessly, but steadily, like a heartbeat. This rhythm has become the pulse of capitalism, flowing through pensions, mortgages, and markets across the globe. That's why when politicians talk about balancing the budget or paying down the national debt, they're selling an illusion. The goal isn't to erase debt. It's to keep it manageable, sustainable, and trusted, so that confidence in the system never falters. Because once trust disappears, numbers lose meaning. Interest rates spike, confidence collapses, and the entire economy, built on nothing but rolling promises, comes to a grinding halt. The real secret of sovereign debt: it was never meant to be fully repaid. The goal is to maintain faith that it could be. A closed loop of trust, and as long as that trust endures, the numbers can stretch as far as necessary. But trust isn't evenly shared. Saying that the world owes it to itself is only partly true. The reality is that interest payments don't circulate equally through society. They flow upward, from ordinary taxpayers and workers to the institutions and investors who hold the debt. In other words, debt isn't just a transfer between countries. It's a transfer between classes. That's why global inequality grows alongside global indebtedness. The system rewards those who own debt and penalizes those who merely pay it. And if this feels familiar, that's because it's the same story repeated on every scale, from households, to nations, to the planet itself. Creditors aren't villains. Debtors aren't victims. They are two halves of the same machine. The real problem emerges when the engine runs out of fuel, when new borrowing can't keep up with the promises made before. That's when the question, who's the creditor, stops being abstract and starts to feel personal. At the top of this global pyramid, there isn't one single face to blame. It's not China. It's not Wall Street. It's not the IMF. It's all of them. And it's all of us. The modern financial system has turned debt itself into money. Governments issue it. Banks multiply it. Investors trade it. Citizens depend on it. The line between debtor and creditor has become nearly invisible. Debt that once meant bondage now represents balance. But if that balance ever collapses, if confidence breaks, the illusion ends, and we are forced to confront what debt really is, a promise that can't last forever. If this perspective changed how you see the world, hit subscribe. History holds the answers, and I'll show you exactly where to find them.